Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. May the peace, mercy, and blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be upon all of you. Welcome to Islam and Life, and thank you for welcoming us into your home this evening to share in some of these conversations. My name is Maymuna Hussain, and we have Brother Khalid Al-Qanza as my co-host and MP Ikra Khalid, and we'll talk a little bit more about tonight's show. Before that, I want to remind you that Islam and Life can be found as a podcast after tonight's recording. So if you want to listen to some of the things that we've been talking about in more depth, recommend it to some of your friends, or, when you're driving, working, whatever it is, listen. So you can find it on our Max podcast page. You can find it on Google Podcasts. You can find it on Spotify, Amazon Music. You can find it on Google TuneIn and Alexa, on iHeartRadio, on Player FM, as well as Podchaser and the Samsung Podcast app. So, as we begin, we say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. We begin in the remembrance and praise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as we begin with anything that we hope will be of goodness. So let us begin with some verses of the Holy Quran.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم يا بني إسرائيل اذكروا نعمتي التي أنعمت عليكم وأوفوا بعهدي أوف بعهدكم وإياي فارهبون وآمنوا بما أنزلت مصدقا لما معكم ولا تكونوا أول كافر به ولا تشتروا بآياتي ثمنا قليلا وإياي فاتقون ولا تلبسوا الحق بالباطل وتكتموا الحق وأنتم تعلمون وأقيموا الصلاة وآتوا الزكاة واركعوا مع الراكعين أتأمرون الناس بالبر وتنسون أنفسكم وأنتم تتلون الكتاب أفلا تعقلون واستعينوا بالصبر والصلاة وإنها لكبيرة إلا على الخاشعين الذين يظنون أنهم ملاقو ربهم وأنهم إليه راجعون.
Welcome my co-host, Brother Khalid Al-Qanza, and I want you to give us a little bit of context on this show, Islam and Life, and what it's about.
So as we return back to this show, Islam and Life, we bring back an opportunity with our community to share their interests, share their stories, share the perspectives that they would like to listen to and engage with on all issues that they deal with as Muslims and as Muslims in this country. We try to bring in conversations that are addressed and directed to them, and we also try to share an Islamic perspective, an Islamic insight into these issues and into these topics of interest. We try to extend through Islam and Life beyond simply a fiqhi, halal and haram discussion into more of a life discussion. And this is why we call the show Islam and Life. And we discuss how to live as Muslims, how to interact as Muslims, how does Islam inform our day-to-day choices and our day-to-day activities in a way that inshallah brings benefit to us and everybody around us in this in our communities and in this dunya, and also please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the hereafter.
Jazakallah khair. And the other unique part to this is that the guests that we have in these conversations are people who are really contributing to the narrative of Islam in Canada. So they're on the ground, really engaged, or they're, committed from an academic perspective, from a narrative perspective. And so we try to have these conversations with them, and we invite you as our audience to engage in the conversation as well. So we offer the live Q&A option as well. So you'll see some links popping up at the bottom. So you will have an option during the conversation, either to just chat into YouTube and send in your questions. You can also join with us live through Zoom. So if you want to find our meeting ID, it's 905-822-2626. And so we can get you your question live with our guests as well. And so having said that, before we get more into our episode for tonight, we want to talk to you a little bit about our critical question of the week. Again, Brother Khalid, can you tell us a little bit about why we're doing critical questions of the week and what it's meant to do?
So again, as we try to do things a little bit different, instead of having a one-way channel where we simply inform our audience about topics and ideas, we want our community also to engage in a thoughtful, critical thinking process about these issues that we present in a way that brings Islam and brings our perspectives into these questions. So out of the norm, we're going to simply share some things to think about, and you feel free to engage online or on our chat or on email, and we will bring it back into the show in different episodes and into different discussions.
So tonight's question is, are we raising our children and next generation as strong Muslims? Send us your thoughts. As Brother Khalid said, you can send it through any of our social media platforms. You can also email us at productions@macnet.ca. So what do you think about this? Are we raising our children and next generation as strong Muslims? Tell us your thoughts on this, inshallah. So as we get into tonight's episode, we want to continue on our second part of this conversation on Islamophobia in Canada. What are the responses? What is the community facing? And it's been a 2-week special episode. Last week we had Aziza Kanji, a legal academic writer and journalist, as well as Mustafa Farouk, former CEO of NCCM, participating in this conversation and looking at the community responses. And tonight we want to take a look from the government side of this as well. Before we get into our conversation, let's take a look at what our research team has put together.
Last week in Islam Life, we discussed the presence of structural Islamophobia within the Canadian government. Our guests emphasized the embedded Islamophobia in all levels, from legislative policies to appointing those who have perpetuated Islamophobia as experts to now combat it. However, they acknowledged that we should take inspiration from other minority groups and rise up to change the narrative, and regularly educate ourselves to ensure change. Merely highlighting the issue is not enough. Rather, accountability and action is needed from the government to bring about change, and for Muslims to feel safe and thrive in the place they call home. Notable members of the Muslim community have publicly called on the government to implement concrete changes. At the National Summit Against Islamophobia, MAC Executive Rania Lawindi addressed the Prime Minister and the Canadian government, calling for immediate action and serious policy changes backed by a mandate and resources, and tied to clear results. She stated there should be 2 primary goals. First, to eliminate institutional and systemic Islamophobia. Second, to institutionalize the fight against Islamophobia through the establishment of a federal office with resources, funding, and mandate to follow through with the commitments from the summit. Khalid Al-Qazzaz, Executive Director of the Institute of Religious and Socio-Political Studies, released an op-ed earlier this week with more recommendations and asking for, amongst other things, an apology by the CRA and the Prime Minister, and an acknowledgement by the CRA of the damage to the Muslim community in order to restore trust. Furthermore, suspending CRA's approach to monitoring terrorism financing, investigation into the CRA, consultation with Muslim advocacy organizations, and representation in oversight bodies were also recommended. The NCCM has also requested action by the federal government, which includes a legislative review of the Canadian Human Rights Act to minimize the effects of Islamophobia using various methods, including funding and support for those harmed by Islamophobia and collecting reliable data on white supremacist groups. So what has the government done to combat Islamophobia thus far? In 2022, the Senate Committee on Human Rights undertook a fact-finding mission listening to affected communities on the impact of Islamophobia. Some key takeaways from the committee hearings included issues surrounding underreporting of hate-motivated crimes due to the community's relationship with the police, and a call for greater investment in anti-racism education and bystander training. The intersection of gender, race, and religion in Islamophobia, particularly the targeting of visibly Muslim women and Black Muslims, was also highlighted. In addition to this mission, the government made the following commitments during the aforementioned summit. They committed to take a whole-of-government approach towards tackling misinformation and dedicating resources towards the work to combat Islamophobia and address concerns of Muslim organizations. So this begs the question, has the government delivered on these commitments? Have the requests by community members been taken into account? And what more can the community do on an individual and collective basis to hold the government accountable in a timely manner? We speak to Liberal MP Iqra Khalid, a lawyer and member of Parliament who works closely with the Prime Minister, and discuss the progress that has been made and where improvements are still needed.
So welcome, MP Iqra Khalid. We're very happy to have you here with us live in studio. And many of you will remember MP Iqra Khalid was the one that championed and introduced the bill, which was passed in 2017, M103, the bill on systemic racism and religious discrimination. So we wanted to kind of start this conversation on your personal journey, in terms of looking at Islamophobia in the position that you are and where you've been situated to, where we've come. If you want to maybe give us a big oversight and the journey itself.
Absolutely. First and foremost, Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for having me here today. I really appreciate this. It's been really inspiring to watch MAC grow to how big you've grown and the representation that you provide to Muslim communities all across the country. Now, I was 28 when I was first, running in politics, 29 when I was elected, and as a young brown Muslim woman, it's hard to navigate because I don't see many people like myself in our government or in leadership positions. It was in the summer of 2016 when there was an e-petition that was circulating across our country. This was e-petition 411 brought by former Member of Parliament Frank Baylis. And this e-petition had about 70,000 signatures on it. It was asking our government to take action in combating Islamophobia in all levels, and ensuring that that Muslim Canadians are not targeted, that they're not victimized. I thought that we should take action on what that e-petition was asking for, and so in December of 2016, I tabled Motion 103 in our House of Commons, asking for the government to study the issue of systemic racism and religious discrimination in our country, and to develop a whole-of-government approach on combating the hatred and the xenophobia that's associated with it, making sure that vulnerable communities are well provided for, are taken care of, that they have safety and security of person, and have equality of opportunity in our country. And then in January 29th, we saw the most tragic thing happen in Canadian history. It was the first time where a gunman had gone into a masjid and gunned down 6 people who lost their lives. Many others were injured. Lives were changed forever. Now, M103 was supposed to be a kumbaya moment. It was supposed to be a motion that would bring our House together, all Parliament, all different parties together. But unfortunately, it didn't. It was a very stressful time, but it was a very important conversation, I think, that Canadians had during that time, as Canada was reeling from the death of of these 6 Muslims in a masjid in Quebec City, there was a national conversation going on about our Charter of Rights and Freedoms in the context of M103. Where does one person's right start? Where does another person's right end? How do the rights complement each other, and how do they conflict, and whose rights ultimately are supreme? So these were all conversations that were happening around M103 in the context of M103 and with respect to Islamophobia. Now, Motion 103 did pass in the House with a majority vote in March 23rd of 2017. And since then, there's been significant progress that has been made on this very important topic. We've had, the study was completed with 30 recommendations, one of which was to introduce January 29th as the Day of Action combating Islamophobia, and that has now been completed. We are going to be going into our 2nd anniversary of commemorating January 29th as that day. We've also developed an anti-racism secretariat, an anti-racism strategy, and provided $23 million to needs-based communities over 2 years to ensure that those organizations that need to build capacity are able to do so with this funding. And then, we saw the incidents at the IMO where, a Muslim brother lost his life. And then we saw the Afzal family in London, Ontario, and these 4 innocent people also lost their lives because of Islamophobia. And that was the time when the Prime Minister and our government realized that there needs to be stronger, more concrete and urgent action right away. That was when we had the summit on combating Islamophobia, where community members from all across the country joined. And now to today, where we've announced a special representative on combating Islamophobia, who is going to liaise with different government departments, who is going to actively engage Muslim communities across the country to ensure that we're keeping on pushing that needle further towards progress and addressing the issues, not just for Canadians of today, but especially for young kids who are going to be living and working with each other in our community for tomorrow.
You summarized the whole show
All
in the
of
first
it.
question.
All of it.
So we actually were meant to ask the first question about you as Sister Iqra this time.
Oh, Sister Iqra.
How did you experience Islamophobia personally? Through this process, you are in a position you entered, as you said, young into the parliament. You made a bold move with M103, but we all lived with around you and felt the heat that you had faced specifically with this motion and probably otherwise. So can you share some of this particular experience?
Absolutely. As a Muslim woman, the kind of hate that we get is a little bit different than what some of my white male colleagues, for example, would get. While M103 was ongoing, actually, maybe I'll take a step back and say the first article that was ever written about me, and I had just become a candidate in the Toronto Star, they published that I was a sister of one of the Toronto 18, which I'm not. So I just share a similar or same last name. I guess that means that you and I are siblings also. But it was automatic that I guess microaggression against who I am and who I was. But thankfully, I've had some really strong mentors across over the past number of years. When M103 was being discussed in the country, there was significant amounts of hate that were directed towards me and to people that look like me, to Muslim community, especially visibly Muslim community members. Death threats became quite normal for me. In fact, I still deal with them. Additional security was a reality. But I like to focus on I remember there was this one lady who sent me a letter from Saskatchewan. And in that letter, she wrote, hang in there, we have your back, you are doing the right thing, and keep going. And I received thousands of such letters too. So I always choose to focus on the positives as opposed to the negatives. I realize that this is my reality. But as we trailblaze, as we kind of carve a path for future generations, somebody's got to carry that brunt. And alhamdulillah, I have the support of a strong, phenomenal community behind me, and you guys are a huge part of that. So we march on. We are strong people, and I think the important part of it all is to be positive about how we approach this topic and how we how we live together as a community.
So similarly, also again focusing on the personal, so how do you? It is quite different that your reaction might be when you hear of incidents of Islamophobia. For example, the incidents that some of our Black Muslim women sisters faced in Edmonton, for example, or even the more difficult that everybody had reacted to. How is it different between you and other colleagues in Parliament?
Well, the type of comments that are made towards me are very different than they would be made towards, some of my non-Muslim white colleagues, for example. So, as a racialized woman, I don't want to repeat the kind of language.
I meant your reaction to these kind of things, because it is different when you feel that actually the person who was affected was a sister of yours, or potentially a sister of yours, or somebody whom you represent actually one way or another, or an organization that you volunteered for or you interacted with. It is different when you're put in that place than the othering that some other politicians might be doing.
Yeah. No, it's easier to empathize and to relate because I know exactly what it feels like, right? And so oftentimes I'll have people reaching out to me from across the country, sharing their experiences, and we try to direct them as best as we can. And that's why I think it's so important when we talk about effective representation, that people should be able to see themselves in their government or in their parliament, in their democratic institution. It's not always easy listening to the stories. It's frustrating. Oftentimes it's, you just want to rip your hair out sometimes because as fast as I want to go, as fast as we want to go, it's sometimes we're just not going fast enough, right? We're not preventing a lot of these really sad incidents from happening. So it's frustrating, but inshallah we'll keep plugging along.
Thank you. If you allow me, Sister Maimouna, I just have one other question to share here. And because I attended the announcement that you led today as the MC of this announcement with Minister Hussein, announcing it's a significant announcement for our community. For the first time, we have a representative in government whose mandate is to understand and combat Islamophobia within the government and in Canada in general. And mashallah, that choice even that was made through weeks of consultation and engaging many in the community led to an excellent outcome with Sister Amira Al-Gawabi, with all her experiences in fighting against Islamophobia and racism. I think it was an excellent choice, and we as a community and as organizations, we stand behind this choice and this representation. However, it also raises expectations, and we as a community have heard a lot from all the way from the Prime Minister to every minister who is involved about their commitment to eradicate Islamophobia from within. And there wasn't any more perfect timing for the show to have it on this day without having inside information, but and we're happy that you're with us today to share how did this decision come about, and really what is the internal expectations, and from you as a Muslim parliamentarian and member of the party, what are your personal expectations of this position, and what do you think realistically Sister Amira can do in this capacity?
Well, this process started in June of 2022 when we started to discuss amongst ourselves what such a representative, what their role would be, whether this office would have teeth, what would be their powers to compel evidence or to compel a department to do X, Y, Z. So throughout consultations with the community, we came up with a mandate for this special representative. I think Minister Ahmed Hussein did a phenomenal job at engaging everybody. To now finally having Sister Amira Al-Gawabi. She is a phenomenal advocate. I love her to death, and I'm proud to call her a friend also. My expectations are to ensure that she is successful in her role. As this is the first time that such a position has been created and we're going to go forth, there's not much of a precedent that has already been set. So she is going to be creating that precedent. And we want to make sure as members of parliament and as community members as well that she is successful. And so we must work together and make sure that she spends the first number of months and years to get to know and to understand what the systemic issues are within government departments, within organizations, within the community, and then to create concrete steps on eradicating. How do we work on eliminating systemic racism within government departments, for example, the CRA being a very good example? How do we create those concrete measures to do that? And I think it's only going to be done with consultation with the community and understanding specifically what the issues are within any government department.
I guess we can get into the difficult questions there.
That was actually a good segue, MP Ikra, in terms of the systemic issues, right? You spoke a little bit about your own personal experiences, and we know there are so many, but these are not individual instances. This is part of something larger. It's structural. And so, I hear you saying that Amira, the hope is that Amira will, inshallah, start to look into this in more depth. But what can we expect on the ground? What can we look at when we think about the everyday life experiences of your average Muslim youth, your average sister who's wearing a hijab, crossing the street? What can we actually start to expect? Because I think you introduced that bill in 2017. Here we are in 2023. We have a position, but what's happening? Because we've had increased acts of hatred, of violence, and you listed them at the beginning of the show. When and how are we going to start to experience that change? What's that going to look like?
Well, I look at an initiative that NCCM had started a number of years back, and that was to start cataloging all of the incidents of hate that happened towards Muslims. On their website, they require the community to proactively tell them, if you don't feel comfortable going to the police, there should be some way of collecting the data that could back up, what work needs to be done. How is this hatred manifesting within the community? What's its impact going to be? Similarly, now as Amira sets up this office, I think data collection, understanding, and documenting each and every instance is going to be very, very important in how those next steps are going to be planned out, how we're going to strategize, how do we deal with these incidents that we have. For example, the CRA is a great way to understand, Muslim-based charities, for example, being targeted more. There was a report a number of years ago by the Public Safety Department that specifically, identified and used Islamophobic terms when referring to Muslim Canadians when it came to national security issues. And that involved a significant amount of advocacy on behalf of Muslim caucus, Muslim MPs, but also the caucus in general, to have that wording changed in that report before it became public and mainstream. So it's really about identifying and then strategizing as to how we're going to combat it. And I think that is where Amira will need all of our help to ensure that we are documenting effectively what the systemic issues are, what are the concrete examples of that systemic racism in our government.
I'll start by saying that our Muslim community, many parts in our Muslim community, like Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and want to believe what he says. So the Prime Minister speaks about the existence of Islamophobia in the government, and he made a commitment to to uncover it and to do what it takes to make this change. However, this is, I believe, the 8th year now in government, and we see this renewed commitment, these statements as a community, but many in the community are starting to question, so when are we going to see change? And what kind of change are we going to see? We've seen some funding to some initiatives, We now see the appointments of these positions and the directorate that was formed. But on the ground, we still do not see real change. Our Muslim organizations are still intimidated by CRA to an extent that some organizations would choose not to put Muslim on their charity application to get we still see Muslim individuals being racially profiled on the borders and in their refugee applications, and the community still does not see that impact. When and how will we see that?
That's a really good question, brother. I have to say that there's no flip of a switch that eliminates. We can't legislate people to love each other. We can't legislate people to be inclusive and to accept one another for who we are. It takes all levels of government. It takes civil society. It takes grassroots organizations. It takes advocacy from individual Canadians to ensure that we're building that fulsome society, right, where we are accepting. I was actually speaking with the Prime Minister earlier today to thank him for his advocacy and for always standing by Muslim Canadians, and he has, shoulder to shoulder, over these past 8 years. You know, at the beginning, I had listed a number of initiatives that we have taken over the past 7 years in government, but I want to talk about what is next, right? What is coming for our future generations? One thing that I'm really advocating for right now is to have a national roundtable that brings in experts, equity-seeking groups, that brings in food and nutrition, mental health, cybersecurity, financial literacy, provinces and territories, their representatives to come together at the table and say, how can we build a nationwide education curriculum that is going to provide the basis for our kids to know what they need to know in order to build a more sustainable, equal, and equity-seeking society like the one that we live in here in Canada. When we target future generations, I think that is where we end the systemic nature of it. And while we're also working on those long-term goals, we need to work on the short-term goals. So you're absolutely right. I mean, as I said earlier, we need to identify, collect the data, and systemically work at it. The Prime Minister is listening. He is paying significant attention to Muslim Canadians and what their needs are. And the needs are not just, combating Islamophobia in a way that there's peace and safety and security of the person, but also about equality of opportunity, right? If, I don't wear a hijab, but sister, you do, right? How does that impact where you're able to work? How does that impact how you, engage in a society, in a community? If we're in the short term, we need to address those systemic issues, ensure that equality of opportunity exists, but then in the long term, ensure that we're raising our next generation to be inclusive for everybody.
Yes, a vision for the future, inshallah, collective vision. I want to remind our viewers that, of course, you're invited to engage in this conversation with MP Khalid. So you can join by calling or joining us on the meeting room at 905-822-2626. Type in your questions on YouTube. Also, let us know where you're from. We want to know who's joining from where. So give us a shout on YouTube, and we'll try to get to that as well. And we'll be getting to some questions shortly. And Ikra, I want to connect on, again, going back to this personal piece and connecting to this point that you said about youth, and the fact that when Islamophobia is really real in your life, and you're dealing with it in your life, and you alluded to some of those experiences that you had, what can we do to move ourselves beyond that? What can we do what can our youth who are listening, who look up to you perhaps even, especially in leadership and, championing some of these causes, what can they look at? What would you say to them,
I remember when just engaging with youth in our community and just remembering how scared they were.
Yes.
At one point, like going to the local masjid, for example. I remember saying and thinking that, when you're scared, when you naturally feel like you want to close the doors to protect yourself, that's exactly when you should be opening the doors. That's exactly when you should be inviting people in. That's it, when you should be going out proactively, engaging with other communities as well, to show them who you are, right? I mean, we're just as Canadian as anybody else. And I think building upon the Muslim identity as well as that Canadian identity is the way that we move forward. When we find and connect our differences, sure, but also our similarities as Canadians. You know, people ask me all the time, what happens in a masjid? I said, come, I'll take you, right? And then I know many Muslims who say, you know, I drive by that temple. I have never wandered in, and I've always wanted to know what was inside that temple. Well, go and find out, right? When we engage with each other, that's kind of how we, you know, and learn something different. That's how we build those bridges within communities. For our youth, one of the main things that I loved when I was a kid growing up, you know, fresh off the boat and, you know, eager to start a life in just everywhere. I would go volunteer at the food bank. I would go volunteer. I used to teach kids art at the Art Gallery of Ontario. Like, anywhere I could go and volunteer, I would. What that did for me was that it helped me understand the community that I live in a little bit better. And it helped the people around me understand who I am as an individual with my intersectional identities as a Muslim, as a woman, as a colored person, and as a Canadian as well.
So let me take it a step deeper, and we will divide that. We want to come out, so somebody want to ask me before we do the show, so what do we want to come out of the show? And of course, we, as you said, we can't flip a switch. You can't make a commitment now and tomorrow, or I mean, like make a decision now and tomorrow the government will act on. But at least as a community and as the audience are engaged, they want to see a roadmap of considerations and commitments as well. So let's divide it into 3 or 4 points. The first one would be on legislation, which is things that are within your reach as an MP. However, of course, legislation is happening at different. So, for example, Bill 21 is at the provincial level, but this kind of legislation, as many in the Liberal Party have indicated, is problematic and primarily problematic to Muslim women. So, how can the Liberal government intervene in order to improve the conditions of Muslim women who are suffering from this specific legislation?
So just on Bill 21, the government and our Justice Minister, you know, the Attorney General and our Prime Minister have said that they will be intervening and appealing that decision at the Supreme Court level. We do need for you know, a case like this one to go through the court systems and ultimately get to the conclusion that it needs to get to, which is that there is a violation of constitutional rights with Bill 21. The other thing that we've been working on for the past number of years now, and hopefully very soon we'll be moving forward, is reinstating what was known then as Section 13 of the Canadian Human Rights Act. This allows for civil remedy for those that have faced online harm because of who they are, and that includes you know, dealing with Islamophobia online. We're also narrowing and defining concretely what hate means in our criminal code, so that the police are now equipped with the proper tools to be able to lay the charges. Right? I mean, when somebody leaves me a voicemail, and this happens often, you know, with threatening to kill me, or, you know, making a lot of nasty comments about who I am as a person, it's difficult for the police to lay a charge when there has been no threat, or, you know, within the framework of what the current criminal code is right now, for them to act on defending and laying charges for the people that are facing that hate. So there's that work going on in the context of online hate. And we know that, you know, when it's online, it festers and it becomes embedded in our reality, in our lived experiences as well. A number of years ago, we had taken some of these groups that were organizing online and declared them to be terrorist organizations. These were white supremacist groups, and what that did was it ultimately disbanded them from the online space, and it took away their ability to organize financially and to come together as a group, because now they were within that definition that we're trying to limit their mobility that would that they were using to target people like Muslim Canadians. So the work is being done, and I really encourage our viewers and yourselves as well. If you have ideas as to how you think we can move forward, work with us. Let us know. The feedback is a gift, and I love to receive that.
So the next level would be on all government policies, and you lived through that phase, not necessarily in government, but it seems that the all government policies towards the Muslim community post 9/11 was looking at the Muslim community from a security lens, and it actually impacted many of the policies that are unchanged until today. And the specific example that was uncovered over the past few months was the example with Revenue Canada and the CRA and the special divisions that target Muslim organizations. If you track this entirely, you will find that a policy, the National Inherent Risk Assessment, was created as a reaction to post 9/11 and international commitments. But the outcome that the previous government produced of a document basically would limit and led to the designation of the focus would be on Muslim organizations and racialized communities. That policy unfortunately did not change in 2015, and it is about to change in these days. I don't know how familiar are you with the National Risk Assessment, but this is really an example of an all-government response that has not changed.
That's a really good point. Now, one of the roles that I play in Parliament is that I sit on the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians. This is a top secret committee. The work that we do is top secret. I am, once again, I think the only racialized person on that committee. I'm obviously a Muslim. When we sit at the decision-making tables, when we have access to what it is that we're trying to do, which is to ensure that there's equality for everybody, to ensure that there's no stereotypes, that people are not being judged for who they are and who they pray to. Sitting at those decision-making tables makes a really big impact. And although I can't talk about the work that I do in NSI COP, I can tell you that the community is well represented around that table. There are changes that are being made slowly, systematically, but nothing would happen overnight. And like one thing I always tell, especially our young people, get onto those tables. Go and sign up for the army. Go and sign up and work in the RCMP. Go and sit where these decisions are made and work towards sitting there. This is a generational dilemma that we're facing. And as the Muslim community grows, within Canada and becomes more sophisticated, now we are understanding what the issues are and are now working in an organized way to combat them. And we need the support of young people and obviously organizations like yourselves in order to make sure that we're always holding the feet to the fire and holding departments accountable that are displaying these kind of negative behavior.
We have a question from online. Again, connected to what you're saying, and maybe perhaps even some frustration on the ground, in this holding over until the next generation, as you're saying. Can you comment on the inaction of resolving systemic Islamophobia and lack of restorative justice as a result of the cyclic expectation for marginalized communities to just forgive and forget? So how do you deal with this on the ground?
Well, I don't think that there's, if there used to be an expectation for marginalized communities to forgive and forget, I don't think that expectation exists today. As I was just saying, I think the community is becoming more sophisticated, is holding governments and all organizations to account, those that are perpetuating Islamophobia, for example. I think that it's breaking the cycle is not as easy as we tend to think. And at the beginning of the show, like I listed out all the things that we have done over the past 7 years to try to break that cycle, to ensure that Muslim Canadians have the support that they need to be able to have equality of opportunity in our country. And like I said, brother, nothing happens with a flip of a switch. It is a constant effort to continue to break that cycle, and inshallah, we will.
So a next point that is related to the expectations of things that can be done is related to transparency and oversight. So, and you as a member of parliament in general, even though we have a system where the majority is also choosing the government, and this makes it even more of a responsibility on individual MPs to really take this oversight, general oversight responsibility, but also push for more transparency. And I believe most recent discussion on this was the one related to CBSA oversight. And many of the security agencies have created this kind of chill effect within our community because of lack of transparency and oversight. Can you tell us what is the government doing in this, and what can we expect of this?
Yes, absolutely. We actually have a legislation that's going through the House of Commons right now. In fact, I've spoken on this issue twice now in the House of Commons to say, look, we need to get our act together. We need to create this oversight body that governs how the CBSA treats the people that are going through our borders, and how there should be a complaint system where if somebody is mistreated by the CBSA, or there's some issues or challenges with how the CBSA is behaving at the borders, that there is some kind of recourse, some kind of complaint mechanism for a Canadian to go and make a complaint. So I will keep you posted on how that's progressing in the House, and inshallah very, very soon that oversight body will be created.
So as we wrap up tonight, we want to welcome a question online. So are you with us? Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Please go ahead. Your question to MP Ikra.
Yes, just a second. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum. So just a quick question. I understand that combating Islamophobia is clearly becoming a need in the current society, in our Canadian society, and inshallah, we are on our way to one day make this thing a thing in the past. However, what my question is, what is the government doing to attend to those who have already been directly affected or impacted by Islamophobia? For example, what has the government done for the survivors of the Quebec mosque shooting, or the family members of the victims, or for the members of the Afzal family who were left behind, as a continued effort for compensating for the loss?
That's a really good question, Farzana, and I really appreciate you asking that question. You're absolutely right. I mean, people that are suffering or have suffered at the hands of Islamophobic incidents do need to get the support from the government, and that support has been provided to victims and families in the Quebec mosque shooting and in the London attack as well. But I would love to hear from you how you think we can, as a government, better support those victims as well. Please write to me, ikra.khalid@parl.gc.ca. I really look forward to hearing your perspective on this.
Thank you so much. So as we wrap up tonight, I don't know, Brother Khalid, if you would like to ask one more question, please go ahead.
Because
yes.
MP Khalid has shared a lot and said many things that is really important, and I think I want her to make a commitment, but in the light of the symbol that you're wearing today, and I know this is not just a token, but it is. I feel that we wear these kinds of symbols to remind us, but also to remind us of our commitments. So, what does the symbol, the green square symbol, remind you and for our community, and what is the commitment that you can make for our community?
I appreciate the question. So this is the Green Square campaign. It was started by NCCM following the Quebec mosque shooting. The Green Square represents the carpets that we couldn't get the bloodstains out of with the killing of the six people and the 19 that were injured as well. The commitment really from my end is to make sure that not only do we never forget what happened, but also that we prevent such incidents from happening again. The Muslim community need not be terrorized anymore. And I commit, and I know that our Prime Minister has a similar commitment, to always do the right thing and ensure that we are taking every step possible to save lives and provide safety and security for Muslim Canadians living in Canada. I wear this green patch around January 29th every year to remind myself and to show other people what the consequences of hate are. I think about those people very, very often, and I can't begin to imagine the people that had to clean up the carpet after such a tragedy in the masjid. So, that's why I wear my green square, and I encourage everybody on January 29th to wear a green square yourself. And again, let me know what your ideas are. My commitment to the community is always there, and I will always speak up for what is right and try to do what is the right thing for our community as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, MP
Thank you.
Ikra Khalid.
Thank you so
Again,
much.
this is a live show, and we know that MP Ikra is running for a flight very soon after. So thank you for your time here with us and for this conversation that's really important for us in the community around Islamophobia in Canada. And for those of you that tuned in later this evening, you can find this recording on a podcast recordings as well after tonight, inshallah. And we encourage you to tune in every Thursday night. This was a special session at 6 o'clock, but usually we're 7:30 live every Thursday, inshallah. And with that, I don't know if Brother Khalid, do you want to say anything before we close tonight?
Yes, next week we'll tackle a new issue that is of interest of the for the Muslim community, and as we address systemic and big issues of Islamophobia, we're going to go into the Muslim family living in Canada and how and what are our considerations and challenges for our families, Muslim families here in Canada. We'll bring in different aspects, different angles, and we'll have scholars on the show as well. So we look forward to having another great conversation next week.
So tune in. And don't forget to send us your thoughts on the critical question of the week. And inshallah, with that, we say thank you to MP Ikra Khalid for everything she's doing in the community. And we will see you next week, inshallah. And Brother Khalid, if you can maybe do a closing dua for us.
سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. جزاكم الله خير. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
Islamic Life is an online production